was thinking just this moment about Jon Kabat-Zinn, and we had Jon Kabat-Zinn on not quite 2 months ago, maybe 6 weeks ago. And he was amazing, as you well know, and whether you were able to join us that night or not, or whether you've read any of his material or you've ever attended a retreat with him, just really, really tremendous human being. And he came into the green room about 30 minutes early, so we had to check tech and stuff like that, sound, the look, and production values, were they okay? And we started to talk, and we just launched into the discussion of his long history with Zen Buddhism. He called it before we went into the main room, his first love. He started, in fact, Susan Pollock sat with a session with him, God knows, I don't know, 1945 or something, if not 1910. But it was way back when. I don't know, like the early 70s or mid 60s or something. Susan can join us to share that story with us again. It's his time, but just such a wonderful human being, and we were so present with each other. We were so there for each other that we actually decided to shut down the conversation because it was going too well. We wanted to save the thusness, the thisness, for the greater group. And so what we ended up doing is just like you and I together here, meditating for about 15 minutes silently together. But thinking about Jon Kabat-Zinn's major message, if there is one, I think it's just this. He's just calling us back to this moment and this very place, right? He's calling us back to this very bell. He's calling us back to this very desk, this very moment, this very feeling, what we feel in our body. One of his innovations in working in medicine has been what he calls the body scan. And he has you just noticing the body, starting from the feet and going up to the top of the head. It's mindfulness, and just this. And I had this great visit with my daughter. It was just a little over a week ago, I guess, week and a half. And she's 27, and I don't know if she's 125 pounds soaking wet, but she studied as an undergraduate political science, and of course she's not going to go into that. Who would go into that mess? But she fell in love with the forest, and she became a forester. And I taught her how to use a chainsaw a long time ago when she was about, 14 or 15, because I had experience out in the woods. I had lived in the woods and cut up logs and worked as a logger and that sort of thing when I was 19. But she came back around, and she welds a chainsaw professionally. I mean, what she does is there's called prescribed burning. There's two kinds of fire mediation. The first one is the one we know well, what the firemen do and what the smoke jumpers do and the wildland firefighters do, of which we've been really so greatly affected here in Northern California. Personally, fire swept over our property and burned most of the houses in the neighborhood in the Kincaid fire. 2019. It was, yeah. And just around Halloween. And at any rate, she became the second half of firefighting. It's called prescribed burning. So it's not suppression. You're not putting out fire. You're actually starting fire. What you're trying to do is you're trying to gather logs and brush and stuff from around parts of the fire, particularly along access roads, those places that might be, accidentally set on fire by human activity. And they pile them up and they cut them all up and they burn them. And they burn the forest. They burn the forest floor to reduce the fuel. So when a real fire comes through, it doesn't burn in the tops of the trees. It doesn't crown. It just burns a bit on the ground, and it's much colder or cooler fire, if that is at all possible. And this is a practice that they believe the Native Americans, practice pretty extensively in North America. Somebody came up with a statistic that it's hard to believe that the North American Indians burned, and the First Nations people in Canada burned something like, millions of acres a year. I don't know if that's true, but it was a practice that was used, to introduce more species, grazing species, and that which they hunted, the herds they hunted, and the overall effect was the fires didn't burn down like they're burning today. So there's a lot going on in that, and she's now she made a application to a graduate school in forestry, and she's luckily been accepted to three programs that she wanted to go. So it's kind of exciting, very exciting. But she's between her job and her school right now. She's got some time, so she decided to go to Green Gulch. A good friend of hers has been sitting Zen for a while, and my daughter's been sitting Zen. She hasn't done any session with us, but so we went to Green Gulch and had just a wonderful visit. I don't know if you've ever been to San Francisco Green Gulch, but I first went in 1982. Where I served as a kind of a translator for Kon Yamada. That's Yamada Roshi, who is our grandfather in the Dharma. And Yamada was there to dedicate a new Zendo in Nevada City area for Gary Snyder's group, and it's called Ring of Bone Zendo. And so I traveled around with Yamada, San Francisco Zen Center and Green Gulch, and up to Nevada City until they just got settled, and kind of did some translating, interpreting, that sort of thing, really. But it had been a long time since I've been there, and so we drove down and met my daughter in the beach, and it was just so lovely, in a just this sort of way. We walked to the beach and along a sandy path, and it's only about a 10-minute walk to Muir Beach from the farm itself. And the daughter went swimming. It was freezing cold weather in the or cold water, and we had a dog. We were throwing a stick for the dog and stuff. So we were just hanging out on the beach. And we came back. We were returning back, and we jumped a bobcat, which was very cool. My dog was going nuts, and she was on the leash, and the bobcat ran off because they have a resident bobcat there that just kind of hangs out. And probably no resident cats. If they've got a resident bobcat, they have no resident cats. And my daughter was asking me about A flower does not fall. She picked up in the library, they have as part of her retreat, they have a study period, and flower does not fall, which is the Genjo Koan by commentary on the Genjo Koan, translated by a gentleman who, Paul Jaffe, I don't know, and if anybody knows how to get a hold of Paul Jaffe, please let me know. But the Genjo Koan is the first fascicle, it's the first group of poems in the Shobo Genzo, the treasury of the true eye of the Dharma. One of Dogen Zenji's, Eihei Dogen, the founder of the Soto school in Japan, one of his great documents, writings, collections of writings, really. And he was a successor to Dongshan, who we mentioned during Zazen. And let me just read you some bits from the Genjo Koan. When all dharmas are the Buddha Dharma, there are delusion and enlightenment, practice, birth, death, and then Buddhas and sentient beings. When the myriad dharmas are all without self, there is no delusion, there's no enlightenment, there's no Buddhas, no sentient beings, no birth and no death. Since originally the Buddha way goes beyond abundance and scarcity, there are birth and death, delusion and enlightenment, and sentient beings and Buddhas. So it's very much in line with, I'm sure you've heard, before awakening, when we practice meditation, we start, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. And then as we begin to open up over a period of time, mountains, somehow they're no longer mountains, they're more than mountains, where they have a kind of light shining inside of them, and rivers have a kind of a light shining inside of them. And we realize that we have a kind of a light shining inside of us, And that light it's somebody had to put a name on it, so they called it Buddha nature. But there is no name. And that's our very substance, right? That is, we have no name. We have no self. And it's because we're not separate, from things. And yet we go one more step. And we realize that, mountains are mountains. And yet they're not mountains. And rivers are not rivers are rivers, and yet they're not rivers. So we realize that Buddha mind in our lives. And that's something that takes countless kalpas, right? We're going from beginning to realizing to again and again and again, and we go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And that's our existence. Let me read another thing that was important to me. I don't share this very much, maybe once or twice in a long time. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. And to study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things. To be enlightened by the myriad dharmas is to bring away bring about the dropping away of body and mind, of both self and others. The traces of enlightenment come to an end, and the traceless enlightenment is continued endlessly. This enlightened life that we're leading right now, even though we don't feel like it's enlightened, but this enlightened life is opening up continuously for us. And what does it allow? It allows us to somehow be open to others and to the world and to ourselves, and to fully realize that. For me, this is why we sit. But a long time I was really struggling in a session a long time ago at Zen Center Los Angeles, and I had been going down I was maybe still in my teens, I don't know how old I was, maybe early 20s. Going down to session at ZCLA and sitting long hours, and had all these crazy dreams of being murdered, of almost being swept away by a cliff of avalanche. And one night I just woke up and I heard the sound of a car outside, and I knew that sound was not separate, was not different from me. I could feel it in my body. I knew it to be true. And I couldn't sleep anymore, and I was listening to the sound of dew dropping off the eaves, heavy fog in LA in that winter. And I knew the sound of the drop before it hit. The sound of the drop before it hit. Mountains are not mountains. The raindrop is not the raindrop. And I walked into the Zen Center library. It was about, 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning. And after I went to get something to eat in the kitchen, which is strictly forbidden, but there are no guards at 2 a.m. in the morning. And I read this. I just picked up a publication from the library. I just opened the book like this, and I saw this phrase that to study Buddhism is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to be awakened by 10,000 things. And I knew that. I knew that's true. Yeah. That's exactly true. But we have these kind of things throughout our lives, If we're open to them, and we're open our heart, if we somehow establish a mind of not knowing, of not knowing that this is, let me see, there's so many negatives here, that this is not it. In other words, to not know what it is, to not think we know what it is, to not think we know what our life is, to not think we know really what our past was or what our future will be, because we can't know anyway. To not fully know what other people are, and to give them space to grow rather than putting them again and again and again into some slot. And to not know ourselves, and to not put ourselves in a slot, whatever it is. I'm fabulous. And by the way, I think you're fabulous. Or I'm terrible, I'm awful. Where we keep grasping on this thing that we need to hold on to. And somehow we may be miserable, but at least it's ours, Well, we don't need that. We don't need that at all. So I'm walking up the trail with my daughter from the beach, and she says, "Oh, well, I picked up this book and I'm reading it. Flowers do not fall. Flowers fall." And so this was in Japanese, and Yasutani Hakuun, who was White Cloud. You may have heard of the three clouds Zendo, San, Un, Zendo, and Kamakura, where I studied and David Weinstein studied for. We both were buddies there for about 8 years almost in Japan. And so Yasutani he's our ancestral teacher. And I know him pretty well because I've been spending the last year and a half translating other books of his, which I've completed and now I have to clean up. And which has been fun. I don't think it's publishable, but anyway, that's another thing. I've just enjoyed doing it. And my daughter said, "Well, why is he so down on the Soto school of Zen? Why is he so negative about Soto Zen teachers?" And here we're, Green Gulch is Soto as the day is long, right? And Soto comes from, we talked about Dongshan, right? Well, Dongshan in Japanese is Tozan. And Tozan's student was Kaoshan. And so in Japanese, it's To and So. So Kao is So. So To. That's a combination of their names. So it's all the same school. And in fact, originally, Pacific Zen comes from the Soto line. But we also claim Rinzai or Linji roots because we use koan so much. Probably more koans than most of the Rinzai people do. And we love it. We really respect Linji and Rinzai, and we feel very close to that branch of Zen as well. So we're kind of a mix in a way. And I started to explain to her, well, the Soto school, sits shikantaza, which is just sitting, but the Rinzai school, uses koans, very much in the way that we're using them right now. Right now, you and I, all of us, are doing koan work. We're just soaking into just this. So I explained to her, about the stress of awakening and not awakening, and how Yasutani, or awakening with koans and kensho and all that, and how Yasutani was very strident, in the need to awaken in some fashion. And we think awakening is important too, but we don't think it's so hard. What we think is the hard part is the bringing that awakening into our lives. So I heard myself kind of explaining Soto and Rinzai to her and Yasutani, not not as an apologist by any means, but just as a to explain. And it was tinny. It didn't sound right to me, and so I stopped explaining. And we were just walking together quietly up the path towards the Zendo, and we could smell dinner coming out of the dining room where they're cooking beautiful, famous really San Francisco Zen Center cooking. And I could tell it was just this, that was the right answer to her question. It wasn't to explain, yes, Tony Roshi and how much of a firebrand he was, and why he in some ways turned against his own school, because he was a Soto monk. It was just this, the gloaming, the sun setting, and the steep hills of the gulch, where the redwood creek flows down and carves out the green gulch, and the Zendo off to the right, where they did a memorial service for David Chadwick just a week ago. And David Chadwick, as you probably know, was a great friend of Pacific Zen, and wrote several books on Tassajara and many books on Shunryu Suzuki, who I think is just fabulous. I love Shunryu Suzuki's work, the founder of Zen Center Los Angeles, or Zen Center San Francisco. And I turned to her and I said, I gave her a hug, and I said, you know what? They're all nice people. And they are. They're all nice people. So what I want to do is I want to read The Gate, which I've read several times. It's sort of the anthem for Pacific Zen. It's from Marie Howe, a good friend of ours. And congratulations, Marie. She got the Pulitzer Prize a couple months ago. The Gate. I had no idea that the gate I would step through to finally enter this world would be the space my brother's body made. He was a little taller than me, a young man, but grown himself by then, done at 28, having folded every sheet, having rinsed every glass he would ever rinse under the cold, running water. This is what you've been waiting for, he used to say to me. And I'd say, what? And he'd say, this, holding up my cheese and mustard sandwich. And I'd say, what? And he'd say, this, sort of looking around. The Gate, Marie Howe.